Now to more of our special Queensland focus on the federal election. As we've seen, Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten have both returned to Queensland this weekend as they fight for crucial votes in a state that will decide the outcome of the poll. In the first half of the campaign, amongst other things, the LNPs promised money for a rail freight corridor in Townsville, an upgrade of the Cairns Marine Precinct and water infrastructure like dams and weirs. Labor's offering funds for a new stadium in Townsville, the Gateway M1 merge upgrade and to improve water quality in the Great Barrier Reef. The Greens are focused on the Reef too and are spruiking $1 billion clean energy transition fund to help workers across the country exit the coal industry. Promises, but are they enough to win your vote? To thrash out the Queensland issues, I was joined a little earlier by the LNP's Steve Ciobo, Labor's Terri Butler and Green Senator Larissa Waters. Well, thank you all for coming in. Pre-polling starts on Tuesday, so let me first give each of you the brief opportunity in one sentence, if we can, to sum up why Queensland voters should vote for your party. Let's go around the desk. Stephen Ciobo, can I start with you?
Sure. Well, in one sentence, because only the Coalition has a national economic plan that's going to put Australia on a pathway to living within its means and ultimately return us back into surplus while focusing on jobs and growth.
Larissa Waters?
Because people want to save the reef, they want to transition to job-rich, clean energy, and I want to see inequality addressed in society, and so they should back the Greens.
And Terri Butler?
Because people want to save Medicare and people would like to see schools funding reform in a way that will actually make every school a better school and give every child a better start to life, not $50 billion worth of tax cuts giveaways to big corporations. And that's why people, I think, will vote Labor once the polls open.
Okay, well, if we can drill down to some Queensland-specific issues now then, and Steve Ciobo, starting with you, South Australia got the submarines contract even before the election had started. What's the big ticket item for Queensland?
Investment in infrastructure, and it's also about having a plan for a transitioning economy. I mean, Queensland is an economy that traditionally has had a real strength in resources and energy. As we've seen commodity prices trail off, we know that we need to transition our economy to focus on opportunities in the future. Now, tourism is one of the biggest, obviously. Queensland is a tourism state. We're going to keep driving tourism numbers into this state, and we're also investing, as I said, in infrastructure, important upgrades, the second range crossing, the improvement of the Bruce Highway, the Ipswich motorway. There's a number of key roads we're investing as well.
Unemployment is a big issue. We've spent some time in regional Queensland this week and around Townsville, around central Queensland. Those communities are really hurting. Are there, specific job numbers that you can give us?
Well, not off the top of my head, but there are specific projects that obviously we've got, from Weipa all the way down the coast and into regional Queensland as well.
Terri Butler, Bill Shorten up in Townsville today was hinting that there might be some more infrastructure announcements for Queensland before the July 2nd election. Is it wise to keep your powder dry when people can start voting from this Tuesday already?
Look, I think obviously it's a big question for all political parties. The way that people vote is changing. There's a lot more people voting via postal or pre-poll votes. But I think what people want is a strong vision for the future, for the long term, not just the election cycle. And that's something that we've gone to some lengths to provide for people. And when you talk about infrastructure, obviously Bill's announced, for example, the $1 billion for tourism infrastructure in the north of Australia. But when you talk about jobs in Queensland, I think the elephant in the room is always going to be the Great Barrier Reef and the damage that's occurred to the Great Barrier Reef. I mean, it's also a provider of 70,000 jobs in Australia. So we think it's really important when you talk about jobs to also do that in a way that recognises the importance of saving the reef.
Where do you see the jobs coming from, Larissa Waters?
Well, it's interesting to see both parties talk about tourism when both of their support for the coal industry is what's driving that coral bleaching on the reef, which is a real shame that they're ignoring the clear science that says you have to choose between new coal and saving the reef. And I too want to see those 70,000 jobs protected, and I want to see those jobs in agriculture protected and all of our climate protected. So when it comes to job creation, clearly clean energy is the way for Queensland. And if we got rid of those fossil fuel subsidies that both of these big parties dole out, given the large donations that they receive from the fossil fuel sector, then we could reinvest some of that money into clean energy, and we could also, importantly, support those currently coal-based communities to make sure that people aren't put on the dole queue, and rather that there are long-term clean energy jobs for them, or agriculture or manufacturing or technology.
You have announced a $1 billion initiative to transition coal workers into the renewable energy sector. But the Greens aren't going to form government in your own right, are you? So is that the sort of policy that you would push to implement as a partner in a minority government situation?
Well, it's the sort of issue that we will work in the Parliament on, in no matter what capacity Queenslanders and Australians see fit to place us in. We do cost our policies and we put forward a balanced budget, and we say, here is your alternative budget. These are the priorities that we have. We want to save the reef. We want to make that transition to the clean energy economy. We want to support people who are on New Start and who want to try to get employment. We can do that, and we show how to do that by raising revenue from, whether it's large corporations, whether it's from getting rid of those fossil fuel subsidies. We can pay for our promises, and we think that people actually want a more fair and equitable society.
Terri Butler, is that something that Labor could go along with in terms of negotiating with the Greens, perhaps some sort of alliance?
Well, actually, we've made our climate policies and our reef policies really clear, and we have said really clearly that we will close down old coal-fired power stations, for example, but we will do so in a way that's got an economic justice attribute to it, which will actually protect and transition the people who are affected by that. But we also need, as a country, to have a significant commitment in relation to climate change, and that's why we have strong targets around climate change, and it's why we have been very clear about saying we want to see, in terms of renewable energy, 50% by 2030. The beauty of our position, of course, is that if we're elected, we'll be in a position to implement it.
Steve Ciobo, the Coalition's catch cry is innovation. What's innovative about an NBN system that the Chamber of Commerce here in Queensland has described as hit and miss and unreliable?
Well, that's a frankly incorrect assertion. The fact is that under the Coalition's NBN, we're offering the same speeds as people would have gotten under Labor, the same speeds as they would have had under Labor's plan. It's going to cost $30 billion less. That's $30 billion less debt on the next generation of young Australians.
But that doesn't change the fact that small business is unhappy with the service that they're getting.
Well, they might be unhappy with the service they've been getting thus far, but when they actually get NBN, what they'll find under the Coalition is that they're getting the same speeds. It's costing $30 billion less. And here's the real kicker. They're going to get it 6 years before the Labor Party would have made it available.
The Chamber of Commerce, though, again, is saying it wants to see some significant commitments from the ALP and the Coalition to get a better rollout of the NBN. Can you commit to that, Terri Butler?
Well, the reason that Steve's being so defensive about the NBN, of course, is because Malcolm Turnbull promised everyone in Australia that they'd have 25 megabits per second by 2016. That deadline's the day before the federal election, and it's certainly not going to be met. I mean, I've got businesses in my electorate on dongles because they can't get cable or ADSL.
So what's Labor going to do about that?
We haven't announced our NBN policy, but I can say to you, we certainly will be making announcements, I suspect, in relation to that very soon. But look, this is really a test, I think, for Malcolm Turnbull. I mean, I went and met with Malcolm Turnbull personally when he was the Communications Minister, and he tried to tell me that my electorate had very good access to internet services. Now, when businesses are telling me they can't get cable or ADSL in Morningside, which is 10 kilometres from the CBD, I know that that's not true, and I also know it from my own experience. In my street at Range, you get slower internet. We have terrible infrastructure.
For your actual initial rollout under Labor's policy, which
it was December 2013 in Griffith.
They would have still been waiting.
It was December 2013 in Griffith, and it's 2018 from you, and you know that you've extended the cost and you've delayed the rollout.
So you're saying in Griffith,
December 2013 was the commencement of the rollout.
Oh, okay.
And you guys, where's your NBN?
Let's move on to a different topic then. Can I have a look at the Senate race in Queensland? Because this is shaping up as an interesting one. Anthony Green has said that Pauline Hanson only needs to get 3 or 4% of the vote and she's in with a chance. Do you see her as a threat, Larissa Walters?
Oh, look, I see her as a threat to unified community values. Once again, her divisiveness and her hatred, she's trying to peddle that again. It's been 20 years now she's been trying to get back into Parliament. Thankfully, Queenslanders haven't seen fit to put those values back into the Parliament, and I think that will be the same this time around. And they want actual caring human beings in their Parliament that are normal people like them, that understand the pressures of everyday life, juggling family and work, and they want a cleaner environment, they want to save the reef. I think that's the sort of Queensland that we will see reflected after the election.
Could the major parties work with Pauline Hanson to get their legislative agenda through?
I mean, this is a question for these guys. They're the ones who struck the deal to change the Senate laws that are going to get her elected. I mean, let's be honest about where this has come from. She's now got a chance on the same level of supporters she's had for the last 8 elections where she's run unsuccessfully to get into the Senate of Australia. So really, this how to work with Pauline Hanson question is a question for the other two people on the panel.
Well, look, what Pauline Hanson does, I guess, will represent the will of the Queensland people. So, we always respect the decisions made by Queenslanders. I don't seek to judge them or moralise in relation to their choices. Their choices are what their choices are. In terms of the coalition, though, we'd make one point very clear, and that is that the only way we're going to have stable, effective governance is if people park their vote with the coalition. Because if they don't do that, then what they're going to see, and we hear all the rumours now and all the talk about the old band getting back together. We see it, a Green-Labor alliance. You see the Greens already pushing the Labor Party to the left. We've seen it in terms of their proposal for higher taxes, for more spending, an anti-business platform. And that's the only minority government situation that could exist, is if the Labor Party and the Greens do a deal together.
So you'd preference Pauline Hanson candidates above the Greens?
No. We're putting the Greens last in the lower house, and obviously the State Director and others will make determinations about the upper house. I haven't seen what's going to happen with respect to the Senate yet.
But
we are out
Steve, I've got one of those Rise Up candidates in my electorate. Does that mean that they'll be ahead of the Greens on your how to vote?
We're going to put the Greens last in terms of behind the Labor Party in terms of the lower house.
We are out of time. Steve Ciobo, Larissa Waters, Terri Butler, thank you very much for your time.